Hi, I'm Elizabeth Leake, and I wanted to give a little bit of background about where this idea came from and my history. In a nutshell, most of my career I've worked for public universities, and my career was pretty evenly split between communication roles and technology administration. And one of the things that was a very pivotal point in my career was an advent that changed the lives of many people. How this trickled down to public education was on September 11, 2001, we all of a sudden had a greater need to secure our technology enterprises. This was basically in the form of legislation, a host of unfunded mandates on universities, and our operational budgets to support infrastructure on a campus level started to take a dive. And there were some other natural circumstances that were taking place at the time that caused our budgets to become overburdened to support technology security in general. So one of the casualties of that was I was working in a technology communication role, and actually my position and 6 others at my university were eliminated. So I started to look at opportunities, and I joined the TerraGrid as the external relations coordinator, because I had this background in communication and technology administration. I had a natural passion for cyber infrastructure. I had just come off of a project called NIUNet in Northern Illinois and had done some of the preliminary marketing and promotion from a regional standpoint for that project. So I found myself working with TerraGrid, and I absolutely fell in love with HPC. Was very involved with the Campus Champion program, which TerraGrid's first Campus Champion was actually started in 2008 from the University of Kentucky. Vikram Gazula, he's usually at these conferences. But when I left in 2011, when that project ended, there were more than 100 champions. And I'm currently a campus champion today at the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. And the inset photograph was taken with David Stack on the right. David is Deputy CIO at the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee, and Charlie Peck, who is with Earlham College. And there was an evening this was actually at a TerraGrid conference in Pittsburgh, where we were talking amongst ourselves about the difficulty campus champions were having to travel to conferences like that. And we were watching our numbers dip. There were fewer attending each year, and it was from this natural circumstance that I described at the university level, because many of these people work for research institutions based at universities. So David and Charlie and a few others, we started to talk about the need to fund a travel-based nonprofit. But we were all too busy to really take control of that at the time. So as TerraGrid was winding down, TerraGrid was basically, it was funded by the National Science Foundation, and there was a period of about 18 months where the 11 resource provider sites were polarized to prepare the next generation, which we know as Exceed today. So during that period of polarization, as their chief communication officer, I pretty much withdrew from the process so that we could keep the ball rolling for the transition. And it was a period of time where I was also caring for my mom, who was always my touchstone when it came to writing about HPC. I figured if I could write something so that my mom understands it, then the general taxpayer would understand it, right? So when I sat with my mom between doctor's appointments and dialysis treatments, she watched a lot of television. I don't even own a television, but we watched a lot of Judge Judy, and the headline at the time was the GSA scandal. And if you've forgotten the GSA scandal, basically the General Services Administration are the comptroller for the US federal budget. They were, in fact, the leader of the GSA was brought up on charges for fraud associated with 2 conference-related activities. There was one in Las Vegas where they spent $800,000. There were 12,600 employees of the GSA, so I imagine that wasn't all that inflated, but what happened in court was Mr. Neely was indicted on 5 counts of fraud. But you have to remember that 2/3 of all research is federally funded. So you're looking at the public perception of research, federal spending, and it's going down the tubes, right there with your travel budget for scholarly travel. So what's unfortunate about this is, as a government employee, and having worked for universities all of my career, first of all, I didn't like the fact that the public perception of federal support was being trashed. Research funding was being trashed. But travel, which I found to be extremely important, when you could come to conferences like this and you could network with others from around the world, it's extremely important. So you're watching your budgets go down, down, down. Travel was becoming a luxury. The legislature began to scrutinize all federal spending, but travel was low-hanging fruit. So there was a mandate for a 30% cut for travel pretty much across the board in most government spending budgets. And that was unfortunate. And this photograph became iconic of Mr. Neely in Las Vegas spending $800,000 of taxpayers' money at a time when the economy was crashing. We were having all this trouble around the world. It wasn't just in the US, it was everywhere, with all kinds, a host of problems. We were struggling with the housing, the bottom out of the housing market, and poverty, crumbling infrastructure. We couldn't afford to maintain our public institutions. So this is what the taxpayer was looking at. So as a communicator, this was very interesting to me. How do you repackage travel so that it is becoming not such a luxury? So that's something that interests me personally. So StemTREK was conceived and was born at a conference, probably at supercomputing, because we first started to talk about it at Exceed in the summer, and the following supercomputing, I think, was where our ideas began to gel. But one of the first things we agreed not to do is to compete for federal funds, because everybody that was included in the planning process, most of them were for federal jobs of one sort or another in the US and in Europe. And we had we thought it would be very important and somewhat useful to have an arrangement where if we funded your travel, and we're focusing, and I'll talk a little bit about my focus groups in a minute, but if we pay for your travel, then you have a strong obligation to pay it forward to help someone else. And we choose scholars, science, technology, engineering, and math scholars from underrepresented groups and regions so that they will go into the front line to help people at home. So you take the world's best innovators and you plug them into what's happening in their home communities so that they become empathetic, they understand what the real problems are. Much like when I was sitting with my mom watching the TV, it was out of my realm, of my frame of reference, but it was very much the frame of reference of the tax-paying public. So the pay it forward element, that was my idea. I thought that would be wonderful. And I like to pay it forward. It makes me feel really good to help people. But I'll tell you how that went here in a little bit. Our focus group primarily are early career STEM scholars, underrepresented groups and regions. And you don't have to look very far to find an underrepresented region these days. If you look at the GDP for some of the nations in Europe, and most recently I've been working in South Africa, there are a lot of underrepresented regions when it comes to HPC. So definitely women. We try to help female scholars whenever possible. I think a lot of our most important work has been in finding mentors. I have a vast amount of social capital that, as an early adopter of social media, and as TerraGrid's external relations coordinator, I was able to develop all of this human capital, people that are in my network that I can call on to mentor scholars. One of the most useful aspects of that is if we have a scholar with a very esoteric skill set and they need a mentor with a little real-world experience, I don't have far to go. I can look into that community of trusted stakeholders and find a mentor easily. On the other end of the technology skill spectrum are, of course, you see our sign is an infinity sign. You've got the high-performance computing geeks, and on the other end, you've got our other focus groups, which are veterans, aging workers, and people with disabilities. And again, I'm not talking just about the US. The conditions that were present in the US were global. But if you don't travel and if you don't get around, you don't understand that the rest of the world is in the same boat. We all share the same economic conditions. But unemployment is extremely close to other economic conditions associated with poverty, crime, mental health. I mean, the list is very long. But that played out a different way in a number of different countries. For example, in Spain, you had the Los Indignados, or the Nini generation, that were neither at work or at school. Unemployment was extremely, vastly pronounced for 18 to 25-year-olds, usually at a rate in many countries of about 25%. And that's the early career group that were getting their PhDs and trying to find a job in this economy. General distrust of government and industry, from the reasons I already explained. And public health became a very big indication as well. Of course, Arab Spring, Occupy Wall Street, all of those movements, if you peel away the layers of the onion, they're rooted in the same problems, the same cause. So StemTREK's advisory board, I looked to the people that I most admired that were part of the TerraGrid project and other projects that I had worked with as an international liaison and as a consultant, as a US correspondent. I worked with the European grid infrastructure. I had some opportunity to work with the Partnership for Advanced Computing in Europe, and most recently the South African Center for High Performance Computing, which is a whole other talk I would love to give. But the pillars of the industry, what I did first is I got a non-compete because of this contentious polarization of the competitive process in TerraGrid. I got a non-disclosure agreement first, and I said, I have this idea for a nonprofit. Would you be on our advisory board? Here's a non-compete. We sign it, read the abstract. And by then, I'd already done all the research. So that was the easy part. I got a whole list of people to help. And it's extremely multidisciplinary, international. I chose a lot of frequent flyers with social capital and points, travel points, which we exploit to fund travel. I need to update my operating system, apparently. And the demographic of our advisory board reflects the core groups that we try to support. Some are openly affiliated and others are anonymous, and I'll tell you why in a moment. Some are active and some are not. Some watch what we do and they speak up if they see me heading down the wrong path because they trust what I'm doing and I trust them. So it's a very harmonious relationship with the advisory board. My son is a very good web designer, and he has his own agency, which I helped him form many years ago. So when it came to design and getting the web presence and the social media platforms set up, my son was very instrumental in helping me there. I was dating a lawyer at the time, so our social circle included a ton of lawyers. He actually is, and he's still involved as an advisor. But one thing about lawyers, no offense, please, but one thing about lawyers is they don't come out and openly admit, so I can't promote their participation, but they're there if I need them. And his skill set happens to be, he's a business professor, and he teaches business ethics. He's also an expert on white-collar crime and corporate psychopaths, which I don't know why that's relevant, but he has a very strong interest in economic drivers and how that relates to crime and health and vitality of communities. I have a cousin who's a lawyer, is an HR lawyer for one of the largest railroads in North America, and she is very helpful, especially as it relates to human capital and when you have a pay-it-forward contribution, what's fair and what's not fair. So she will blow the whistle on occasion. Another friend who is a lawyer that works for the USDA. So every now and then I have a question for her as well. As I mentioned, military was one of the core groups, and one of the things I noticed in the demographic of people who were suffering from the economic conditions are veterans, many of whom were claiming disability. So Walt Walker was an advisor that has been very helpful. He was actually a drill sergeant most of his career. Now he's retired. But he told me that they're not going to pay it forward. You can't make people pay it forward. So does anybody want to guess if people are paying it forward? Yeah, well, Walt was right, I'm sorry to say. But I don't want to condemn people because I still have faith in people, and I believe there are givers and takers in the world, and I think that the community that we serve just happen to be very busy. But they are tuned into our information stream, and in doing so, they see the success stories, they see how others are paying it forward, and they'll pay it forward when their time comes. John Towns, I can hear his words. He said, he's one of our advisors, sooner or later, you're going to have to make some money. You can't rely on the kindness of others forever, because we were funding travel with donated points. And he's right, of course. Ian Foster said, gosh, he was the conference chair for the eScience conference. He said, we don't have anything planned next Thursday night during our conference. Why don't you plan a fundraiser for StemTREK? So we did. And I realized that among those vast amounts of friends that we had, they all worked for federal agencies or universities and couldn't afford $25 for the cover charge for a fundraiser. I think we had just enough to make, to cut our loss that night, but we certainly didn't make any money. So we're in the market for new friends. If you know anybody that has money, send them our way. But the whole concept now is to change our focus from the pay it forward, I'm okay, you're okay model to more of a funded model. And a colleague of mine who had a similar situation, she was working for the Krell Institute, they lost funding, and she's also started a nonprofit, but hers is actually going to be more focused on generating the funds. And we plan to work together in that I will manage the social capital, the communications, and Marianne Leong, who's on the left in this photograph, has started Sustainable Horizons, which will focus more on the mentoring and the sustained relationship for scholars as they progress through their careers. And there's a brochure on the back table. We're actually raising money now to fund scholarly travel to the Siam conference next spring. So if you'd like to contribute, that's available. Another thing we've explored is other non-monetized way to trim your travel budgets. And house swapping, room sharing, ride sharing, and again, those things are very easy to do with your social capital. Bartering. And Filippo Spiga, actually, who's in the audience, photographed here on the left, was someone who I experimented with initially in the house swap. Filippo and I decided to trade arrangements, and he was in Dublin at the time at the High Performance Computing Center there, and he wanted to visit Chicago and I wanted to visit Dublin, so we did a house swap. I'm not sure if we would probably want to do that because of there's just a lot of complications, but I can tell you that Filippo has been wonderfully supportive, and just the opportunity to share that experience I would highly recommend, because you get to know someone really well when you do that. And we had an opportunity to take a road trip and learned a lot about each other. We met Jiawan Meng, which actually Jiawan Meng introduced me to his wife, who had a newly minted PhD in material science and couldn't find a job. Her name is Wan, and Wa became our first beneficiary, and we sent her to supercomputing in 12. The donor for her points actually worked at her home institution, who was a sheer contractor, who is now a StemTREK advisor. He's an expert in business networking, social science, and science networks in general. So that influence actually, which I'm getting my time signal here, led to WA's development. Her pay it forward contribution was to develop a business networking tool called SiteOf8. SiteOf8 is actually being used to pair mentors with proteges for the broader engagement program for SC14. I'm the deputy chair for that program. So it's being beta tested now. The front end is a little kludgy and the back end is very slow, but it's kind of cool. So you can see the Not Your Contractor influence here as well. It's got a mapping tool. We've got 178 in this set right here. Basically what it does, and the reason I had the picnic photo there, we went on a picnic and she said, what do you need? What does StemTREK need? And I said, I need a way to automate what I do personally, because I match make all the time. But if I got hit by a bus, there would be no way to match these skills, these institutions, these people that have common interests. And I'm most concerned about the very esoteric skill sets like high-performance computing security. Get them in here, match them up, let them find their proteges or their mentors. So this is what we've done. We've got 70 proteges and 100 mentors. You dump them in, you could parse by location, institution, skill set, interests, and it has different modes. This is the list mode, and it also will separate everyone with one or by area of expertise. So that was very useful when it came to matching. So ultimately, what SiteOf8 will do for WA is, she couldn't find a job, basically, in this market, but now she'll be creating jobs with SiteOf8. And one of her big jobs now is she recently had a new baby. So this is something she can do from her home. And she didn't know 2 years ago that she would be managing her own business and the mother of a new baby, Max, who was actually named for Max the horse on the Disney film Tangled, because this is the year of the horse in China. So Max is a success story, as is SiteOf8. And one of the things I told Wa, she called me a few weeks ago and said, I'm not making any money. I said, well, why do you think you should make money? I've been at this how many years and I'm not making money? But if you pursue your passion, you are more content being the first one at work, the last to leave, and the last to be paid, because you're really pursuing what it is you enjoy the most. And I enjoy helping people travel, and I will probably do this in my retirement. And I look at StemTREK very much as my retirement plan. I work for the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee, and my salary feeds my belly, but StemTREK feeds my soul. So if you do want to donate or contribute to the SIAM conference, what Marianne and I are doing for SC, we're basically doing for SIAM and future conferences to promote more women and ethnic minorities into the field, specifically HPC. So thank you. I also have some HPC Matters stickers on the back table. But that's it.